Autumn for Black Tree, written and read by Oliver Tonic. This is a completed novella, read as a series. Enjoy the story from here on, or start from the beginning with the first episode. And now, back to the tale. Episode 7. The Nature of Love and Fire. When the sun was high in the sky the next day, Paxiss sat at the top of a hill near the center of the village. Her arms were folded over her legs as she pressed her knees to her chest. The wind blew through her hair, and she closed her eyes and breathed in the fresh air. Barley came up the hill behind her and was surprised to see her. "What are you up to?" he asked. She kept her eyes closed and smiled at the sound of his voice reaching her ears. She was beginning to grow fond of it. It was boyish yet strong, and it somehow warmed her inside. "I like to come up here sometimes when I get some free time," she said. "I like to watch the kids play and the animals graze. It's nice." He sat himself next to her, laying his sword next to him. He looked out and squinted at the little figures in the village below. "I came up here scouting to get a vantage point. I'm trying to locate some hiding places for our mushroom-loving friends." He pointed down into the valley. "The forestation over there is an option. It's thick enough that at least the firecat could have a home in there. Their homes would have to be close for either of them to find their way so close to the central part of the town before being spotted, not to mention getting away before the king's men came to get them." Pax's eyes were open now, looking at where he was pointing. She nodded. Barley looked at her, watching her hair blow in the wind. He squinted in the breeze. "You've got a weird town." Paxis scoffed and buried her head beneath her folded arms. "Tell me about it." Barley shook his head. "I had one of the craziest things happen to me. Some kind of haze came through my window." Pax's eyes widened. "The green cough? You got it too?" She was noticeably excited. "Yeah, last night. It hit you too?" "No, not last night," she said. "Mine was, I think, the night before. I asked people about it, and no one knows what I'm talking about. I'm so glad someone else noticed." "That seems to be a pattern around here. Nobody seems to recognize any of the other strange happenings around them. How long has the green cough been going on?" "As long as I can remember," she said. "I have no idea what it is. I can't figure it out. All I know is I'm the only one who coughs that stuff up at night when it happens. Until now. I can't tell you what a relief it is to talk to someone about it." Barley chuckled. "You poor thing." "Between that and the mushroom thing," Paxis cut in with a long groan. "Don't even get me started on the mushrooms. Look down there. Do you see that?" She pointed to a patch of land in the distance with a fence around it. Even from where they were, Barley could see it was covered in a distinct off-white color. "Is that someone's land?" he asked. "Community land," she said. She put her hand on his knee and looked directly into his eyes. "That's a cemetery." Barley squinted. He could see little gray tombstones poking up from the off-white field. His heart sank. "What in the world?" "Your guess is as good as mine," she said. "I've heard everything from 'it's our people's version of flowers and it looks beautiful' to 'the Undertaker doesn't have a plot of land, so that's his royal contribution.'" Barley's face spelled out clear disturbance. "Why can't flowers be your people's version of flowers?" "I can't tell you a thing about how this place works. I've seen livestock die from eating the mushrooms, and then people just bury them under the same crop as fertilizer." Barley grimaced. "And no one puts two and two together for their own loved ones in the cemetery." Paxis put her legs and arms up to her chest again, resting her nose on her forearms with her eyes watching the people. He could see her eyes glisten with tears. They were quiet on the hill for a bit. "Do you like the king and queen?" Barley asked after a moment. She scoffed again, still looking in the distance. "No." "Not at all?" "No," she said again, more flatly than before. "To hear them talk, you'd think they care about their people," he said. Pax's eyelids drooped. "Trust me, they don't." Barley looked out over the valley again for a short time. "Are you happy?" he eventually asked. "I try to be." "But this place, does it make you happy to live here?" "No," she said. Barley leaned back on his hands and watched the breeze toss her light brown hair. "Thank you for your honesty." The wind blew past them, and he could hear the gusts of air trying to whistle as they were caught in his ears. "You know," Barley said, "someone like you, someone who would take the time to do what you did for me, they deserve to be happy." They sat together looking over the horizon. Paxiss let her head gently fall and come to a rest on Barley's arm. Later that day, after doing a bit more searching, Barley began to head home as the sun went down. He was stopped a few yards from his cottage by Dibsley. "King Farron requests your company this evening at the palace dining hall." Barley was caught off guard by the request as he was just beginning to ready himself to wind down for the day. He had a bag he carried draped around him filled with leftover food, a change of clothes, a blanket, and his tarp in case he found himself needing to spend the night at another farm. His ongoing search had left him leaving the house each day ready to follow a lead at a moment's notice. If he found a time-sensitive clue, he didn't want to have to head all the way back to the guest home and back, presenting the creatures more opportunity for escape. "Sure, let me go get my more formal attire. I was out talking to townsfolk again today, and—" No, that won't be necessary. Please come as you are. The king wants a comfortable evening," said Dibsley. "Well, thank you," said Barley. "Lead the way, sir." They made their way to the palace and through the gates. They went up some stairs until they reached the dining hall where Farron was pouring a glass of wine. He looked up and saw him. "Hello! Please come sit, and set your things down." He dismissed his man and poured Barley a glass. It was just small talk at first. The king sat and they chatted about their respective days. Barley told him how nice the people had been to him overall, and the king told him some of his daily duties and projects around the palace that the queen had been pressuring him to take care of. Time passed, and the conversation slowly grew restrained. It finally reached a lull, and before either of them could force a new conversation topic, a door opened. They both turned to see Queen Caporia entering the room. She had a fashionable nightgown on and a ribbon of silky peach cloth wrapped loosely around her palm. "Oh, hello, boys. I didn't mean to interrupt. I was just heading up to bed," she said. "Oh, no, you're fine," said Farron. "We're just catching up. Barley was telling me about his search and how lovely he thinks our town is." Caporia gave him a soft and settled smile. "Well, don't keep him up too late. I'm sure he has a lot more to tend to in the morning, especially with him doubling the work for himself." She shook her head. "A second monster. You are a zealous one." King Farron chuckled as she made her way up a staircase adjacent the dining room table. It headed up along a wall to a series of rooms. Barley assumed one must be the bedroom. The queen gently held up her gown until she reached the top of the stairs. "Good night, Barley, and don't be long, honey." "I'll be along soon," he said as she disappeared into one of the rooms. He stared at Barley with a lopsided grin. Suddenly the knight felt that the mood was uncomfortable. He adjusted a bit in his chair. "Love is a strange thing, isn't it?" said the king. Barley matched the king's gaze. He could already tell this was the start of another of his trademark frustrating conversations. "You open up your heart to someone, and you can only hope that they don't run you right through," he continued. "It's against all the rules of battle and self-preservation." Barley cleared his throat. "Well, some would say that's the beautiful thing about it. It's not to be held up against rules like that." "But dangerous all the same," said the king, holding his wine goblet in his hand. He brought it to his lips slowly and took a sip. While they had been chatting, one of the servants had lit a fire in the fireplace. It had been crackling as it helped stave off the cool night air creeping in through the cold stone walls of the palace. Farron looked into it now for a moment. "You know, it can be a lot like a flame. If you aren't careful, it can burn out of control. You don't know what parts of your life it will consume. It can take your way of life, your independence. That's why my wife taught me to keep a healthy distance." He looked back at Barley, whose face was like a stone. He was trying to keep it serious and flat. The knight knew that somehow Farron had seen Paxiss and him together on the hill. He didn't want him reading into anything any further, and he didn't want his face to give him any more to go on. "The one you have your eye on is a lot like my wife, you know," Farron said. "You would do well to heed my words lest you become just like me." He rubbed his finger around the rim of his goblet. "When I was first married, I was all flowers and gifts. I wanted to spend every moment with my new bride. But she showed me the trouble with yearning hearts. When two of them want to rub together, it can be nice at first, but soon they grow raw, tender to the touch. We have a cage to protect them for a reason." Suddenly, Barley thought he had heard some sort of a commotion. Something was shuffling upstairs. He looked up towards the Queen's quarters. Farron began to aerate his wine and keep his eyes on Barley. "Someday a young man like yourself may open up that cage of yours to find the danger." A loud crash and a scream rang out into the dining hall. "It's a lot closer than you think." Barley's jaw tightened, and he shot a glance at Farron, who sat with a strangely coy grin on his face. Barley leapt from his seat and ran up the stairs. He burst into the Queen's bedroom, swinging the door open with a bang. The Queen stood by her bed with her gown torn and tattered, a look of terror in her eyes. The large room had furniture strewn about and some bottles of perfume broken on the floor. Caporia pointed to the large balcony overlooking the valley. The doors were swung open and the curtains in front of it were torn as they waved about in the evening breeze. They looked as though they were reaching out but were unable to catch whatever had crashed through them. It was as though they wanted revenge on whatever nearly ripped them from their hinges and dragged them into the night. Barley ran to the edge of the balcony and looked over. There was a tree that had grown high up enough that it wasn't terribly far below him. In the darkness he could see parts of it were smoldering. Burning scratch marks glowed like cinders in its bark. From this angle he could see these travel partially down the tree, followed by broken branches that were host to small smoldering fires at the base of its trunk. "This is impossible," he thought. "Why would it be here? What was going on?" He turned back toward the Queen and put his arms on her tattered shoulders. "Are you all right?" Her eyes filled with tears immediately. She began crying profusely. "It came out of nowhere," she sobbed, slipping from his hands to the floor. She wept into her hands. "It's a good thing we have a professional here," said Farron, appearing suddenly at the door. He knelt down near his wife. "You'd better hurry," he said. "I think it's getting away." Barley took off out the door and shuffled down the stairs as quickly as he could. He ran through the dining hall, swiping his bag as he went. He headed down the stairs leading from the dining room and found his way out of the front gates. As he passed the men posted at the entrance, he slipped a sword out of one of their sheaths and kept running. "Royal business, I'll return it," he called back to them as he went. The guard who was stolen from nearly gave chase before the other guard stayed him with a hand gesture and a shake of his head. Barley quickly searched the perimeter with the palace guards watching him. He made his way around until he found the balcony and the tree that was reaching up toward it. He found the smoldering branches below it and quickly located the singed footprints in the dead leaves on the ground. Little embers glowed faintly, allowing him to track in the dark. Still in his informal clothes, unarmored, weighed with supplies, and carrying a strange sword, he was desperate to catch his bounty. The creature had been such a strange thing to track. He often thought it seemed it should be so much simpler to find something that caught fire the way the beast did. But it left no trace in the day aside from the destruction it left behind. Finally, a soft glow caught his eye in the distance. As he drew closer, he knew it was no campfire. It grew brighter and brighter until he caught a glimpse of it. It was breathing heavy with its body sinking below its shoulder blades as it heaved. He could feel the heat from the cat increase as he quietly closed the distance between them. He had almost reached it when he suddenly couldn't move. He turned around and saw his bag was caught on a tree branch. Barley cursed himself. It was an amateur mistake not to leave a bag this large up in a tree or a safe spot before pursuing a bounty, but he'd been so caught up. He pulled on his strap. Even as he did, he realized it was amateur mistake number 2. The branch snapped. A roar echoed through the forest, and in a blaze, the fire cat went tearing through the trees away from him. As Barley followed closely behind, slipping through the singed leaves, he saw that, fortunately, it had nowhere to go. It had quickly hit the wall of a large mountainous rock face. It was pacing back and forth, looking up at it to find a foothold, intent on climbing. "Easy, girl," he said, coming up slowly behind it. It whipped itself around to face him, its claws outstretched from its paws and its nose twisted into a snarl. He put out his free hand reflexively. "Whoa, whoa," he said softly. "It's okay. It's all right. No one is here to hurt you." The flames were high on its back and its teeth bore ferociously. He continued to speak in his consoling tone. He didn't know why he didn't strike. Many monsters before this Barley had battled and slew with precision, but this creature was different. It was scared, and he knew it. He didn't exactly have a plan for a non-lethal capture, but he knew now, in this moment, that violence was not the answer. "I'm going to put this down, okay?" he said, laying his sword gently on the forest floor. The high and raging flames wavered. They were sinking lower to its body. It watched as the sword was rested on the ground and Barley took a step away from it. The tensing in its muscles eased and the flames subsided more. It stopped growling and sat. Its glowing eyes were wide with what looked something like sadness to the knight. He felt an odd sensation looking into them. Its eyes seemed so exceptionally expressive that Barley found it almost disturbing to see it in an animal. He shuddered as, for an instant, his mind tried to work out if what he was experiencing was a dream. The flames grew weaker and weaker until they were a flicker. The creature began to change. Its whipping tail began to shrink, and its paws grew slowly into fingers. Gradually, before Barley's eyes, the cat became a girl. Her eyes stayed wide as she changed and still held the sadness. Before him, huddled in a trembling naked ball, was Paxiss. Hey guys, it's Oliver. Thank you so much for listening. Give me a like if you enjoyed and subscribe if you haven't already. I'll have weekly episodes up until all 18 parts of the story are fully released, so stay tuned.